Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
Hello and welcome to ThePrint. About 6 years ago, India and France came together to form the International Solar Alliance, or the ISA, to promote solar energy and renewable power across the globe. It was initiated by PM Modi and former French President Francois Hollande, and today the organization has about 121 member states. Today I have with us the Director General of the ISA, Dr. Ajay Mathur, who is going to answer some burning questions we have, especially with the latest IPCC report. Dr. Mathur, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's such a pleasure to be with you and your audience, Pia.
Thank you, sir. So we'll just dive into the questions right now. First, the recent IPCC report said South Asia is expected to receive extreme weather events, rainfall, heat waves. And as we've seen with the tragedy that happened in Uttarakhand earlier this year with the glacier burst, is India prepared for these extreme weather events to come?
I think India is far better prepared than it was even a decade ago. The creation of the National Disaster Management Authority and the linkage of a series of actions to be taken whenever a disaster is expected to strike has put us in a position at least where we can predict and take corrective actions. But this is as far as the climate events are concerned, or let me say any disaster events are concerned.
Okay.
Can we, with climate, can we also start planning so that these are, India has like the Solar Alliance, International Solar Alliance, started the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. That in a sense tells you where the thinking is, that if we design the infrastructure to be in such a manner that it withstands the disasters, all of us will be better off. For example, if you look at the city of Guwahati, like many other cities, gets a lot of flooding. And the reason it gets a lot of flooding is that opposite the Brahmaputra, opposite the city of Guwahati, that's where the water comes down the hills of Meghalaya. And if you've got construction which is blocking the way of water coming and flowing in Brahmaputra, then you have flooding. So correcting those kinds of actions and taking future action so that we build with this resilience in mind is where our future is. I think we are just to start that road.
So what you're saying is addressing climate change will also mean addressing urban planning to a degree.
Yes, amongst other things, yes. Urban planning, rural planning, the fact that the Chief Minister of Bihar or the government of India wants a lot of rural ponds is an indication of the amount of water storage that is needed for a variety of reasons. Climate is just one of the reasons, but the fact that local agriculture, local cattle, local drinking needs means that it doesn't make sense to have long pipes going everywhere, but to have local ponds which can meet these needs is the need of our. Yes, both in urban areas and in rural areas, we need to prepare for the future.
So now I'm going to be asking you more about the ISA itself, just so our viewers can get a deeper understanding. So when the ISA was first formed in 2015, I believe it was formed on the sidelines of the Paris Accord. And in 2017, the US under the Trump administration left the Paris Accord. Now the Biden administration has rejoined the Paris Accord. So do you expect the US to join the ISA pretty soon?
Let me put it this way. We would love to have the US, we would love to have every country in the world to be part of the ISA. We also fully understand that the US has a range of internal domestic compulsions, including the fact that an intergovernmental treaty organization, the International Solar Alliance, would need would need some kind of Senate approval, and the party in power doesn't have a majority in the Senate unless they use the vice president's vote. So we do understand this challenge, but we would very much like to see US being a part of the ISA deliberations.
So there hasn't been any informal interest from the US?
Oh, there have been a few formal interactions. They continue. We are trying to find ways in which the US can work with the Solar Alliance.
Got it. Now, my second question is, why hasn't China joined? And the question I ask this is, of course, we know the current border tensions between India and China. But what I've seen on the climate, in the climate sphere, India and China have actually been on the same page when it comes to CBDR, which is, just for our viewers, it's a UN principle when it comes to addressing climate change. It's called the Common but Differentiated Responsibilities. So it essentially means that all countries, sort of acknowledge that they have a responsibility to address climate change, but not all of them are responsible. So they all have a common duty, but they're not all responsible. So it's sort of like a UN principle of equity. So China and India have been fairly on the same page with regard to that. They have jointly opposed the EU's carbon border tax as well as part of the basic group. So do we see any interest from China or no?
Well, as far as the ISA is concerned, we would very much like China and every other country of the world, as I said earlier, to be a member of the Solar Alliance. In 2017, when it was called the Pacific COP, it was held in Bonn, we had the Chinese minister at the Indian pavilion, and he said, this was in December 2017, in November 2017, when he said that he hoped that China would become a member of the ISA soon. Where what we hope is that we carry out this shaking of hands and China joining in as soon as possible.
Okay. So now I wanted to ask, last year the ISA had the annual meet in September, if I'm not wrong, and that was a virtual one. When can we expect the meet this year? And will it also be virtual?
This year is also a virtual meeting, and it's on the 20th of October. And we will have a range of side events which focus on the agenda, which will be on the 18th of October. And again, a series of side events which focus on various things of interest to our member countries on the 21st of October.
And what would you say is some of the pressing issues in the agenda?
So there are 3 or 4 key issues that are of importance. One is the so-called One Sun, One World, One Grid, which is a picture of having regional grids across the world. So the South Asian grid is one regional grid, the Gulf grid is another grid, the East Asian grid is another grid, and then they're interconnected. Because now think of it. When evening falls, that's when we have the maximum electricity demand in India, because you've got air conditioners at home, you've got air conditioners at work, you've got air conditioners in markets, all of them working at the same time. Lights are on at the same time,
right,
but there's no sun. However, there is sun shining in Saudi Arabia. So if you can get a connector from the Gulf countries to India, it means that we could get renewable energy even though the sun is not shining. We hope that at COP26, we will be able to get a political declaration of the global intent to move ahead towards these kinds of global interconnectors or global green grids in order to achieve these kinds of globe-spanning interconnectors which allow the sun to be used even though it is not shining in a particular geography.
And this is going to be proposed, as you said, in COP26, during COP26 in November in Glasgow.
Absolutely.
Okay. So now I wanted to ask about India's agenda as far as addressing climate change and building up our renewable energy capacity. So I know that we have just passed our target of 100 gigawatts of renewable capacity, and we have an ambitious target of hitting 450 gigawatts of power generation capacity by 2030. So in the next 9 years. And correct me if I'm wrong, sir, but that means that if we hit 450 gigawatts by the next 9 years, then 60% of the country would be relying on renewable energy. So do you think we are on track, or it's a smooth path towards that target?
So, Pia, first of all, the International Solar Alliance is a grouping of various member countries, including India. Okay. And I think for an international organization to comment on the domestic policies of any one member country is very inappropriate. But the key answer to the question that you're asking, not only in India but across the world, is that this really depends on the cost of round-the-clock renewable energy. That means renewables plus battery storage, providing us electricity even at night, which is competitive with the cost of fossil fuel-based electricity, gas or coal. Once that happens, you will start seeing a cliff in terms of how new solar plus battery capacity is added. So the question that you said, it's going to be smooth? No, it's not going to be smooth. It's going to increase. And then when we see this change occur, and this change will occur between 2022 next year and 2025 in various geographies across the world. After that, we will start seeing this cliff. And, whether you look at the Bloomberg BNEF projections, or you look at the IEA projections, or our own ISA projections, country by country, on when does the competitiveness occur, all of them show that in the next 4 years, we will see this competitiveness occur, and then we will see a sudden growth in capacity to occur after that.
I see. Okay. So I remember in February 2018, sort of when the International Solar Alliance had its founding conference, PM Modi had sort of urged developed countries to join the ISA. And if I could just read out a quote from him, he said, "While we are doing everything that is required of us, we expect that others also join to fulfill the commitment based on common but differentiated responsibility." Just for our viewers, that was CBDR. That's a reference to what we explained earlier. So my question to you, sir, is, developing countries like India have often been referred to as the polluters of the world. If you remember, former US President Donald Trump called India and China, the dirty polluters of the world in a presidential debate during the US elections last year. So it is a common categorization, I would say. But do you feel like the ISA is given a platform, especially for developing countries, to sort of show that they are being proactive in addressing climate change and finding solutions?
One of the key issues that the Solar Alliance does is it helps all countries, developed and developing, in accelerating the rate of solarization. In other words, the leaders of the country, politicians and policymakers, and you and I as consumers, start seeing that solar is the preferred energy option. Now, that preference may be because of climate change in some geographies. It may be because it reduces the amount of oil and gas I have to import in other countries. It could be because of the local pollution that is reduced in yet other countries. So the reasons could be very different. But we are about helping each country to bring in solarization. What does this mean? This means, first of all, for everybody, for the politicians, for you and I as consumers, for bankers, to be able to appreciate and implement what is needed for solar to take off. So, for example, do the regulations allow variable renewables like solar and wind into the grid? If so, how will the balancing occur? Well, you need a grid code for it. So we help countries write the grid code. There are yet another countries where banks want to know, how should I do the risk assessment of a solar project? I know how to do it for a coal or a gas project, but I do not do it for a solar project. So we do training programs for bankers across the world on risk mitigation, on risk assessment of solar projects. There are yet another countries which say, well, money doesn't flow to us. You know, one of the greatest problems of solar projects is 95% of the cost of electricity is in what you set up upfront, the solar panel and the factories. Only 5% is operational costs. But if you look at fossil fuels, only 50% of the cost of electricity is the first cost, the cost of the plant. 50% is the cost of coal or gas. Which means if all my money is upfront, I need that money to be at as low an interest rate as possible. Okay, when countries say we don't get it at a low interest rate, can the Solar Alliance help? So what we do is go into those countries and put in some Solar Alliance money to create a viability gap funding. And then once they do it, that becomes a vehicle, that project becomes a vehicle for the changes to occur in the countries so that a second and a third and a fifth and a 100th project can follow after that. So in a variety of ways, the Solar Alliance works with its member countries to accelerate the process of solarization.
I see. And in this process, do you feel it would be possible for countries like India to achieve net zero carbon emissions?
See, net zero is a word which has got very different meanings for different people. Because, you know, what do I count as going to zero? I can say I'm leaving out steel because I don't know how steel is going to be decarbonized. I'm leaving out cement because no matter what I do, the carbonation reaction will produce CO2. I'm leaving out plastics because I will use carbon dioxide. I will use carbon dioxide there from the use of carbon. So I'm not really the boundary as far as net zero is concerned. India's goal is that it becomes economically viable for renewable electricity produced, that's zero carbon, and for all applications where we cannot electrify, then we move to green hydrogen. And green hydrogen is made by the splitting of water using renewable electricity. So together, renewable electricity and green hydrogen power the economy. Can India do that? Of course it can do that. That is why we've created all the institutions that are needed for that. And you are seeing what happened in the case of renewables. You are seeing what is happening in the case of batteries. We have seen a very large industrial house coming in saying that they're going to manufacture solar panels, they're going to manufacture batteries, they're going to manufacture electrolyzers for making green hydrogen, and they're going to manufacture fuel cells for using that hydrogen. And if you do it at a scale, it becomes cost effective even in a country like India. So yes, it is possible.
It is possible. The reason I ask is because, you know, there has been some pushback from India on, you know, whether it should be compelled to achieve net zero carbon emission.
The issue is the year by happens and what is counted in the picture, what is inside and what is outside. So is steel and cement and petrochemicals inside the picture or outside the picture? And how do you reach there? What are the kinds of steps? So it's very easy for me to say, I'm going to go net zero by 2050. What about 2030? What about 2040? What are the kinds of steps you're taking on the way? I think those are more important. So as I said, renewables and green hydrogen is the way to go. That's the big picture. We are looking at renewable electricity cost effective in the next 4 or 5 years. We are looking at green hydrogen. I think it will take a little longer for it to become cost effective. Therefore, this is the major difference between developing and developed countries, that in developing countries, there's a lot of infrastructure which is yet to be built. And if it is that infrastructure, it's your own house, it's offices, it's factories, if they become zero carbon right from the beginning, then we don't have to switch. So this is a very different philosophy as opposed to the developed countries, which have to switch.
Have to undo everything.
From high carbon to zero carbon, because it's already done. And then as the older stock in a country like India and other developing countries reaches the end of its life, it's replaced by zero carbon because that's what's cost effective. Now, in that picture, as I said, we don't know when these various cost transitions will occur. So it's very difficult to make a guess as to the year. It's very, so me, it's the goal which matters, it's the path which matters. And having semantic titles often creates more problems than it solves.
So I had actually asked this question because when I said India has been under pressure, I meant also, there's been a push from the US climate envoy, John Kerry, for India to achieve net zero carbon emissions. And it's interesting that you sort of laid out the path of how and it is possible, but there is also a need to distinguish between developed and developing nations. So I think that is the end of my questions. Thank you so much for taking the time out to speak to us very quickly.
Yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure. Delighted to be with you and look forward to joining you again.